Hello, my name is Jeff Rolka. I want to thank you for checking out my video. This is Community Questions 14. I crack myself up. Community Questions 14, I open up a comment over on the YouTube Community tab, and then you very generously share your thoughts, concerns, questions regarding singing, and I do my best to address them here in video format. I recently learned about what I think are called chapters in YouTube. So if you're looking for like a specific topic, or you want to like skip around a little bit, if you hover over the timeline, then like all the different chapters will kind of, you'll see where the hash marks are when they pop up, and you can get like the first sentence or two from the question in the description. I put that right at the top, right above the area where if you wanted to support my channel, there are varieties of ways to do that. You'll find that in the description. They include Patreon, where you can get MP3s and PDFs of the exercises in a kind of rudimentary. The PDFs are kind of rudimentary, but still I think very helpful. As well as other things that you can find in there, including affiliate links. So yeah, this is one of my favorite things that I do here on YouTube. I'm just gonna charge right on in. I feel like there was something that I was supposed to mention here at the beginning, and if I think of it, I will divert momentarily in order to address it. But other than that, oh, that's what it was. Normally, I take these questions in order that they come in. I have done something different. I have organized them more or less by subject matter, and then I've interspersed kind of little fun things that came in to kind of break it up a little bit. So if you do watch this all the way through, you'll get like a little bit of technique, a little bit of jocularity, I think that's the right word, if it's funny, and so on and so forth. Right. So, grouping one. Number one may be a little unrelated, but any tips or ideas for virtual rehearsals where there's no or minimal lag on video streaming software? Incredibly timely question. There are a lot of different resources out there, much more than what you would normally think of as Zoom, Skype, Google Hangouts, which I think has a different name now, FaceTime if you use Apple or Mac computers. And as a NATS member, which is the National Association of Teachers of Singing, although it's international, so I'm not sure why they say national. Anyway, there are numerous companies that market zero latency or other kinds of means by which to teach. And many of them, on the surface, look really incredible. However, they are remarkably difficult to enact, to set up, even on your end, much less on the remote user's end. Suffice to say, the simplest solutions I have often found to be the best. So this question is not related to voice teaching in general, but I was thinking about the different formats, because there are some options that basically allow you to rehearse with zero latency as if you're all in the same room together. It is really that good. I couldn't remember the name of that particular company, and I'm sorry, but the thing was that everybody had to be on the same page with their software. There were numerous hardware and software requirements. Everyone had to be hardlined into their internet connection, so you couldn't do this via Wi-Fi. And there were a number of other constraints to get close to it. But when you could make sure all of these things happened, it did work quite remarkably. It just seemed like it was unrealistic, and that's my assessment of it, unrealistic to expect that you could get everybody on board to implement that kind of a system. What I do think is realistic is, as much as possible, to use a hardwired connection, even if your computer only has USB-C ports on it, then a dongle is usually, you can get those that are not terribly expensive, and they will support an Ethernet connection. As much as possible, I would advise you to, much as I don't like to wear headphones in those situations, the use of headphones will make sure that you'll get fewer interruptions. Normally, when you start talking, your microphone goes live on your end, and then it in turn will make it so that you can't hear what's coming back at you. And when you use headphones and separate out those audio output versus input sources, things seemed to work a little bit more smoothly in that regard. Closing all other programs that are running all other programs or apps, shutting down any kind of things that run in the background. Certainly don't do a backup, an online backup, while you are trying to run your virtual session. All of those things, like little data management kinds of things, will make it so that your computer has the most unfettered access to your CPU to try to maintain as good a connection as possible. Now, some of the online protocols, such as Skype, automatically detect the entire possible bandwidth speed. Others, such as, again, it used to be called Google Hangouts, I'm not sure what it's called now, they would let you change it. There was a small program that you can find online, I think you can still find it, it's called Noir. And you have to be able to identify the ports that your software for virtual meetings, you have to be able to identify which ports on the computer it's using, the virtual ports, if you will. They're just numbers in the network preferences. You'll have to be able to identify those ports or assign them in your networking software. But Noir allows you to tailor the amount of bandwidth that you allow the networking software to use. So for example, when I was living in England, not so very long ago, I was using a satellite connection. The satellite connection was blisteringly fast, but the turnaround time from output to input was much slower than your typical well, certainly way slower than a fiber optic connection, but still slower even than a DSL connection. And so what Noir allowed me to do was to tell Skype, don't use the full upload speed that you think is available to you, because what it would do is it would really go for that. And then when it would turn around, those milliseconds of latency that it would perceive when it would go from uploading to downloading would cause these really, really bad pauses or really horrible latency in the connection. By throttling back Skype's available bandwidth, it actually made it much smoother because it was only really using a portion of the upload-download speeds. So the turnaround points were much, much smoother on the satellite connection. So knowing what kind of connection you're using would also be very, very helpful too. Without getting too expensive with the whole thing, obviously, if you can afford to have a faster internet connection at your home, that would be better still. Of course, for my purposes, I do virtually everything remotely. So, I pay a bit more to have gigabit internet here with a fiber optic connection. It makes sure that when I am working with clients or when I am uploading to YouTube or doing things like that, I have the smoothest connection and the fastest times that I can reasonably get. And my systems are largely hardwired with Ethernet cables, so that again, my up-down speeds regularly, if I do a speed test on them, are into the 700, 800 meg range. The only way I'd get it any faster is if I literally had like a short cable and just plugged directly into the router. But suffice to say, those would be some things that you can consider. In terms of getting the most out of your rehearsals, I would suggest you think about them as a parts preparation and coordination session, not necessarily as an ensemble rehearsal kind of session. So some ability to maybe be able to quickly live record yourself and then send an MP3 across. I know it sounds onerous, but with a little bit of practice, you'll get really fast at it. And what this would allow you to do is to play your part, send it over to another bandmate and then have them play their part along with it. Now, you could even cumulatively record these things and go around the whole ensemble, but at the very least, it allows you to do your part and then send it to your bandmate and hear how their part integrates with it, see how well they're playing it, whether or not it works, if there's anything that needs to change. Additionally, you'll have a nice archive of these things, which might be nice in the future to have, or little practice rehearsal snippets that could be useful. So just a few thoughts. I do hope that's helpful. It is trying times when it comes to ensemble practice, and I certainly wish you all the best in that. Is there such a thing as a lady tenor? What about women that can't sing the upper half of the alto range? Wouldn't they be tenors? Not exactly, no. So, is there such a thing as a lady tenor? There is an awful lot of overlap between the contralto voice and the tenor voice. For example, contraltos with access to some of the lowest pitches will generally get down to about there. Tenors comfortably will generally go to about there, but we'll get a few more notes too. I've heard, I had the pleasure of working with a contralto voice who could do that. It was exquisite. That's a bit rarer. And I mean that in terms of having consistent tone quality. By the same token, you'll regularly get tenors that will vocalize to that D natural. And you can find the contralto voice can have very distinct difficulties around that A or B4 right there below that D5. Not to say that tenors don't get into trouble lower down too, but they can often get to that D5. Why aren't they the same thing? They aren't the same thing because the registration events are in different places. For tenors, their transitions between the primo passaggio is going to be somewhere in the range of C4. Yeah, generally speaking, D5, E flat 5, pardon me, D4, E flat 4 at a stretch are going to be where the primo passaggio for the tenors are. Now, this is not the point. This is the point when they start entering the zona di passaggio, where they're starting to make incremental changes to make a smooth transition over the secondo passaggio. The secondo passaggio, the so-called break for tenors, F, G, A flat as a rarity. That's not the highest note you can force out. So if you're squeezing out G4s and A flat 4s, that doesn't make you a tenorino or a lyric tenor. It just means that you're squeezing them out. You have to locate the natural transition point. By natural transition point, I mean that when you sing it, it allows you to make your way into your head voice and back out in a fairly seamless fashion. In that example, I started in my chest voice, I went to my head voice, and I came back. Pretty seamless. The contralto or alto voice, their registration events are in different locations, and that means that the voice functions differently. So contralto voices will regularly have a registration event somewhere in that G4, A flat 4 area, but that's not the secondo passaggio like it would be for a tenorino or a lyric tenor. That's their primo passaggio. The secondo passaggio for the contralto voice is typically D5. That's well beyond the secondo passaggio for the tenor. Whether or not they develop the range up to that or beyond it doesn't make them a tenor. It just means they haven't developed that range. The registration events are in different places. The structure of the voice is different, and so it will function differently than the tenor voice will. And contralto voice at F4 is going to have a very different kind of phonation than a tenor who's sitting right on top of their secondo passaggio. The way that the voice is configured and the way that one needs to facilitate the use of it is different. So, not the same thing. I know I'm late, but just in case, how do you prevent stress affecting your singing voice? With C19 still ever present, that's becoming a problem. Any way you can, I think, is the best way to articulate that. I think that that comes down to the individual and what you find to be helpful in managing your stress levels. For me, I'm pretty physically active. I run almost every day. On days that I don't run, I will get out for a very long-ish kind of walk. Often I will also do some rock climbing, indoor, outdoor, or on a moon board, which is a kind of climbing wall that I built in my garden. I will do some exercise. Exercise is really, really helpful to me. I am very conscious of my caffeine consumption in order to try to avoid stress. I will also take news breaks where I just kind of turn it off for a little while. And I will also take screen breaks where I don't use computing devices as much, or I will limit their functionality rather extremely. I mean, this iPad, for example, I think is over 10 years old. So basically the only thing I can do on it any longer is read PDFs, which is what I'm doing right now in making this video. It's great for that. I love it. And the battery still lasts forever. It's wonderful. But there's no surfing the net. There's no getting the news. There's no notifications on this iPad any longer. And I am very happy about that. So those are the things that I do to manage stress. I do enjoy a nice cup of tea. And in particular, at times like this, the ginger honey lemon recipe that I posted some time ago is nice. I like that even more than what one might typically think of as relaxing teas like chamomiles and stuff like that. So I think that if you can observe what you do that brings some sense of comfort and peace, then those things would be important as much as possible and as regularly as possible in these trying times. Have you seen The Greatest Showman before? If you have, what are your thoughts about it? To me, it was an absolute outstanding movie. I agree. I thought it was fantastic and I loved it. And I love the singing and I really appreciate all of the acting. I thought it was great. Not really much else to say. And we've watched a little bits and pieces of it around here, so my daughters frequently sing along, which is really cool. Do you have any suggestions on how to maintain your sound quality during this quarantine times? Regular practice, regular care, self-care, like I mentioned a few moments ago. I should have coupled those two questions together. Just take really, really good care of yourself. Exercise in whatever capacity you can. I'm a huge advocate of exercise. So obviously doctor's orders and things like that, if you have health conditions or sensitivities, make sure that it's okay for you to do those things. But exercise of any variety, I think, is particularly helpful in managing stress and staying in good shape. In terms of the specifics of vocal delivery, I have made it a real point to be much more conscious of my water consumption. I was not drinking nearly so much water as I ought to have been until very recently. And what I have found is that by upping my consumption of water, everything gets just a little bit easier. In particular, my warm-ups have gone much more smoothly, and that makes the whole time that I have to practice and to sing quite a bit more effective. I was getting a little craggy there for a while, and truth be told, I use my voice an awful lot. If I'm not making a video, then I'm often teaching a lesson or I'm having some type of discussion about this, that, or the other thing. And it's in all that talking that I can get very tired out. So I've been working on a track recently and wasn't particularly satisfied with the flexibility that I was having with my vocals. Started to evaluate what I was doing. Changed up my practice regimen a little bit, increased my fluid consumption, specifically water, cut down a little bit on my caffeine consumption, and things are working out a little bit better. The key is to observe and then act on your observations and try things. I'm not suggesting, like for example, I mentioned cutting back on caffeine consumption. I'm not saying you have to cut it all out, but if you have 3 cups of coffee a day, have 2 and see if that helps. Even if it's just a little bit, try having 1 and see what difference that makes. and then decide if that's okay, if you can tolerate that trade-off, because it is a bit of a trade-off. A cup of coffee, a nice cup of tea, it's delightful. It's lovely, 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 lovely stuff. But if it's making your voice craggy or creating fatigue in the later afternoon in the absence of it, or something else, stress, anxiety, and stress can be a real factor in singing, then you're going to have to evaluate that and on a case-by-case basis make the decision as to whether or not the trade-off is one that you wish to make. Okay, my question is about singing while your voice is breaking. In my case, because I'm transgender and on testosterone, but I'm assuming it's the same for boys going through regular puberty, can you just keep singing, or should you be extra careful to not put too much strain on your vocal cords? My voice has already dropped from a coloratura soprano to baritone, but my range is very small at the moment, and I don't want to hurt my voice. Okay, wise move. So I have been very fortunate in being able to have some conversations, some rather lengthy conversations about this particular type of change. And it is with those in mind that I would suggest to you that changes are not exactly the same. There is a thickening to the vocal folds that will occur, or has occurred. If your voice is already dropped, then that will already have occurred. But the type of lengthening that would occur in a pubescent male's voice is not going to occur. So it's just going to be the thickening. That won't go away. That will remain beyond the point of the hormone therapy. So what does one do? Your range is understandably limited. You're now probably going to experience the registration events that I often talk about, the primo passaggio and the secondo passaggio, much more, shall we say, clearly. Particularly coming from a soprano voice, coloratura or not, those fox, like the sopranos, the mezzos, the size of the instrument is such, this is somewhat speculation, though it is in the textbooks. The size of the instrument tends to diminish the severity of the registration events. So a soprano's voice, because of the weight of it, if you will, the thickness of the vocal folds, doesn't tend to feel the secondo passaggio nearly so distinctly as mezzos. Still, they're close to the soprano, but they're going to feel it a bit more. But compared to a contralto voice, they're going to feel it quite a lot more than their soprano friends, much less the tenor or baritone fox. For the tenor and baritone fox, that registration event, the secondo passaggio, can feel very, very, well, it feels like the break. We've called it such. And so that may be part of what's limiting your range. My advice to you would be to work in the center of your range, which I'm getting the impression that's probably what you've been doing, but work in the center of your range and then just gradually work your way outwards from there. As you identify the location of your primo passaggio and ultimately your secondo passaggio, you can begin the process of working through the incremental changes that one adopts throughout the zona di passaggio to facilitate a nice smooth transition. So you may also find that vowel modification is much more important now than maybe it had been before. That is going to facilitate your changes as you approach the secondo passaggio, and ultimately that will be what allows you to extend your range ever so much higher. If you've really fallen into that baritone range, at least you've got like a lovely amount of low end to work with. Hopefully that's given you at least an octave to an octave and a fifth with which to work and begin your practice. But my last thought for you is be patient, and I know that can be difficult, especially if you have a lot of experience singing in your past. Try to be patient, try to take it in stride and take it slowly. The more deliberate you are in getting your vowel alignment to work for you in this newfound range, and then gradually expand outwards from there, the easier all of these transitions will be. In particular, having good vowel alignment in the comfortable thyroarytenoid area of your voice will make it much easier to identify the primo passaggio, which in turn makes it easier to know when to begin vowel modifications and when to begin increasing subglottic air pressure to facilitate the transition over the secondo passaggio, the break. Basically, everything will be a lot easier and it'll all go faster if you're patient in this beginning process. I do hope that helps. Do you have any good advice for college auditions coming up, especially with song choice? Pick an easy winner. Basically, that's my advice. Auditions are not the times to experiment on your long-term projects or go for something that's, at the very limits of your technical capabilities. Pick the easy winner. Pick the tune that you've sung 1,000 times, that if you woke up from a dream in the middle of the night and you just had to start singing that song, that it would be beautiful and lovely and you would know it and have it down and all that kind of stuff. Pick the easy winner. Consider who you are auditioning for. Consider the program that you are auditioning for. Carefully read the requirements, carefully assess what they mean and how you can best align that easy winner with those requirements for the audition. Consider the repertoire that the instructor for whom you'll be auditioning has sung in the past. Consider their favorites or the things that they have. I know that sounds kind of cheesy, but anything that can help you get to where you want to be is what we want to do. So I'm not saying that you need to pander to the individual, but consider their experience, consider their repertoire, consider their history as a performer when you decide that you're going to go and audition. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to use Rachmaninoff's vocalise if you're trying to audition for a contemporary musical theater program, when those two things don't really go hand in hand. I mean, not to say that vocalise won't show miraculous technique and it's incredibly exposing, but we want to choose our easy winners with what is appropriate for the program. Last thought, start early. If you don't have an easy winner that plugs into that, start as soon as you possibly can. Get the audition requirements as soon as you can. Start to evaluate them. Start your song selection. Find tunes that adhere to your kind of best vocal qualities, whatever they happen to be. Find those pieces that fit everything and get started. I would also suggest you prepare all related materials as early as possible too. So if you need numbered copies of the sheet music, if you need extra copies in the appropriate key for the accompanist, I would get that prepared much sooner than later. Finding out the requirements in terms of what will be provided for you too, I find to be much more comforting and helpful to me. So is there going to be an accompanist? Do you have to sing a cappella? What other requirements are there? So I know that that's not specific, but those are the things that I go through with my clients when auditions are coming up. What are the requirements? What do you have to prepare? What are the constraints? What are your best vocal traits? Let's bring that. And generally this works really well. So I hope that helps. There are occasions in which it is difficult to exercise our voices correctly with 15-minute warm-up because of time. Is there any exercise that gives you the chance to sing appropriately in this occasions? Thank you, Jeff. I'm afraid I'm a little confused about this because I can't tell if 15 minutes is, if the individual here is thinking of that as a long time or it's too short a time. As such, I feel like the best I can do for this question is to consider carefully what it is you're warming up for. If it's a single song, then picking out the specific challenges in that song are what I would use as a warm-up, assuming that I'm not warming up from absolute cold. So let's just say that whatever it is one has to sing, it's not an absolute cold start. There's something that's been done. You've been awake for most of the day. Maybe you could sing earlier, but then you had to go into like a green room and wait with a load of other people where you couldn't sing. And then you have to sing this thing. In that kind of a situation, the piece that you're most likely singing is just a single work. And so consider carefully the challenges in that and make sure that those challenges, whatever they happen to be, a high phrase, a low phrase, a very fast or wordy phrase, something like that, make sure that you have focused on that in your warm-up. The bigger picture advice here is to tailor your warm-ups to the repertoire that you are singing. There is no one overall warm-up that's going to suit every occasion and every piece, because pieces have different ranges and different requirements, different pacing, different lengths of phrases, and all manners of different changes. That's why there's so many warm-ups on this channel. And I'll keep going, because we can always have a little bit of a different look at it because there's so much other repertoire out there. Again, I know not specific, but I do hope that helps. Right, we're now entering the head voice falsetto range segment of our show today. So buckle up, here we go. Jeff, how can I improve my range? The short answer to that is to work on the registration events in your voice. Learn to make a smooth transition over the secondo passaggio that will grant you another perfect fourth above it, that will be reliably in tune and consistent with your tone quality, and from there you can assess where to go. You haven't identified your FOC, your vocal like type, soprano, mezzo, alto, baritone, tenor. So I can't be more specific than that, but working on one's registration events, that's the way to expand range. Always that I try to sing high note, my voice shake too much, and my belly. And then they have like the laughing with tears emojis there. I suspect that this individual is belting as high as they possibly can. It's hard for me to say without knowing you or hearing you, but that's what I'm getting from that. Particularly as they're referencing the belly, I'm assuming that it means you're pushing really hard. It's no surprise that your voice is tremulous or is kind of flagging on you like that. My advice, similar to the first one, learn to make your registration event from chest voice, thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice to cricothyroid dominant singing voice. Then you can start to make more informed decisions about how you want your voice to be used as you continue to sing these notes that are in that upper register of your voice. My head voice or falsetto sounds pretty weak, and it's hard to me sing in that range. What I can do? Depending on where you're at with it, probably keep going. Additionally, I would encourage you to record yourself and evaluate it. Record it one day and evaluate it the next day. Don't go back to back like that, because too frequently we can kind of hear what we think we just heard in our heads. The fact of the matter is that when we start to use our cricothyroid dominant singing voice, our head voices, the internal sensation and the physical internal experience of it and the auditory internal experience is quite dramatically different from what is heard outside. So start with that. If you are making a good transition into your head voice, your cricothyroid dominant singing voice, then continue to evaluate your registration event technique through the zona di passaggio. I find that looking specifically at the tonal onsets can be very beneficial in balancing out how the vocal fold is coordinated through that range and ultimately over the secondo passaggio. The short, quick hit advice there is look for the smallest viable sound at the tonic, assuming the tonic is the lowest note of the scale. So when you're starting here, for example, E, find that E, so that when you start your ascent, you're coming from the most balanced, well-coordinated vocal fold configuration that you can. This makes the process of vocal fold elongation and vowel modification much easier as you mount the scale. That can help, I hate to use the word strengthen, because it's not a matter of strength. It's not like lifting weights. In some coordination, yes, and there is some muscle development, I suppose, that occurs, but these muscles are extremely small. They're very, very tiny. That being said, it's mostly coordination and efficiency that we improve, and that in turn releases a lot of the soft tissue in the oral cavity. This generates more resonance, and we sound as if we sound stronger for these things, but it's not the same thing as, you know, pump and iron to build muscle. Do you have any advice on singing in falsetto? The quick advice is really get your airflow dialed in, really have your sense of appoggio well practiced and well established and very consistent. That will make the most difference in terms of accessing that range of your voice. Now, in my teaching, I do use the word falsetto, though I don't use it interchangeably. When I talk about falsetto, I'm talking about a particular range of the male voice. If you're talking about falsetto as in falsetto tone production, where it gets that kind of airy, effervescent sound to it, then my advice to you is start with a well-balanced vocal fold, and then find how much air leakage and separation of the vocal fold you need to get the desired result. That way, you'll still get a very efficient use of your voice. You'll still get good phrasing and things like that. You'll only induce a small amount of additional vocal fatigue, as opposed to what we can do if we're really using our voice with too much abduction. In that range, for me, for example, can be very tiresome. Hey, Jeff. Oh, wait, sorry. Hey, Jeff, can you please do a workout to make head voice more stronger? That's probably 90% of the videos on my channel. Go forth. They're waiting for you. Pick your FOC. If it says full range, it goes into the cricothyroid dominant singing voice range, which is head voice. Cricothyroid dominant is head voice. Hey, Jeff, I'm a baritone whose chest voice peaks out at around a G4. Could you give me any tips for vocal stamina within the top of my chest voice? Also, any advice for exercises to strengthen this part of my voice would be great. Thank you. Well, if you are a baritone and you're using your chest voice to G4, you are not honoring the registration event. And by honor, I mean observing and executing in observation thereof. I'm not honoring like, oh, I'm honoring, you know, the secondo passaggio. That's not at all what I mean by that. So baritone range vocalists will have their secondo passaggio somewhere. You're not like your bass is, just a baritone. D4 to E4 would be a lyric baritone. So if you're singing G4s in your chest voice, then you are pushing your voice far beyond minor third, beyond that registration event. There's only so much stamina you're going to build there because you're really pushing those muscles a bit harder then quite frankly, I would advise. If you want more stamina, I would advise you to reevaluate your secondo passaggio such that you can make a smooth transition across it. That way you have a choice, and even if you still chose to belt, you could, in theory, allow for some elongation of the vocal fold, a little more cricothyroid dominance than a straight up thyroarytenoid dominant sound at G4. That would perhaps decrease your fatigue and increase your stamina. You haven't mentioned fatigue at all, but I think about that as the counterpoint to increasing stamina. If we need to increase our stamina, it's because we're not operating our voice for as long or as well as we might like it to, or maybe we can't hold notes quite as long as we'd like to. And so we look at stamina, increasing that stamina. At the very least, learning to make that registration event creates more opportunities, more choices for you in your singing, and also informs how the mechanisms work. And so you can make more efficient use of the mechanism for having learned how to do that seamless transition. By the very nature of learning to use the mechanisms more efficiently, your stamina will increase. How do I get better chord closure in my head voice specifically? I would start with oo vowel sounds, but it depends a little bit on where you're at in your technique. I mean, if it just automatically skates off into an airy sound, then you're looking, it is chord closure, yes, but that level of abduction or separation is probably going to require some reevaluation of your overall technique. Start with descending phrases, usually with an oo vowel on a short syllable. You is particularly helpful. Keep at that until such a point as you can ascend. You. When you can go down and go back up, then you're demonstrating the ability to start in your cricothyroid dominant singing voice and exit it, and then re-enter and exit again. That's good for your coordination. It's also showing you how the voice is operating. Then you can start to incorporate more scales and things like that into your practice. What is the capital of Assyria? Ashur. I had to look it up though, I have to admit. Okay, my voice feels wildly inconsistent. My question to you though, regarding the capital of Assyria is African or European swallow? Some days I'm nailing it. Other days, after a song or two, an uncontrollable rasp overtakes me, particularly with my ah vowels. That's a clue. What could be going wrong that isn't happening the other 60% of the time? Secondarily, when I cross the secondo passaggio, I'm struggling not to slip into my falsetto. This is related to the ah thing. 1 in 5 times, I'll nail it with good resonance, but this seems to trigger the aforementioned rasp when I conscientiously try to remove the breathiness from my tone if I keep it up for 2 or 3 songs. This I find confusing, because here, if I'm reading this correctly, 1 in 5 times I'll nail it with good resonance, but this seems to trigger the aforementioned rasp when I conscientiously try to remove the breathiness from my tone if I keep it up for 2 or 3 songs. So it's like the good resonance has the air, and that's where my misunderstanding is occurring in that, but I could be reading too much into it. Are these vowel alignment issues? Diaphragmatic breathing, throat tension? Help, please. This is probably my biggest obstacle between where I'm at and the volume I'd like to be able to sing at consistently. And then volume comes into play here. Okay, so lots of things in here. In some respects, I feel like you kind of answered your own question. But let's look at that a little more closely. From the bottom up, volume. Try to let go of the volume as much as possible. Volume, and I don't know that you mean loud or soft, because volume could mean either. It could mean comfortable. I don't know what you mean. I am reading it and taking it to mean loud. And my thought there is to try to let that go. That your voice will be loud when you have made a smooth transition across the secondo passaggio, when you have good resonance in your voice. Volume, an increase in which, is a natural consequence of a well-aligned system and well-produced tone. So try to think about it that way. The lack of it or the inconsistencies of it are clues as to how you are using your voice that is inefficient. So the volume will be there when you have everything aligned. Throat tension, quite likely, especially if you've belted in the past, or if you didn't have technique and you've been studying technique and you're learning to do like the registration events, then throat tension can persist for some time. Even in minor ways, it can impede the smooth transitions in the voice. Are these vowel alignment issues? You said it yourself. It's particularly with the ah vowel, right? This too uncontrollable rasp overtakes me, particularly with my ah vowels. Your ah vowels are not aligning properly. Otherwise, the raspiness might occur in the other vowels, or it wouldn't be present in the ah vowel. Now, in truth, it's really easy to have that happen with ah. It is. The ah vowel is one that regularly presents challenges for vocalists. So you're not alone, but that particular vowel becoming raspy regularly is a clue that there's a vowel alignment concept here that's not entirely working. Diaphragmatic breathing. Specifically, I would twist that to say the apagio breath management system, because too frequently I think diaphragmatic breathing gets talked about, but it's usually in the form of stick your stomach out to inhale and suck it back in to exhale, and that is largely ineffective. That will not produce appropriate subglottic air pressure for you as consistently or efficiently as when you configure your breathing apparatus, your rib cage, and your engagement to work with apagio breath management. And there's like a bunch of videos that have been done on this recently, and I just did a really, I think, informative Q&A on this. I think it was singing questions from comments 9, I think is where the close-ups happened and all that. But there's lots of resources online, and you can always get in touch with me via my website, and I can get you some links or something. But apagio breath management changed everything for me. I would highly recommend you look into it if you haven't already. And when we look at the things that you mentioned at the end of your question, everything else kind of already gets answered for. Some days I'm nailing it, other days after a song or two an uncontrollable rasp overtakes me, particularly with my ah vowels. Yeah, there is an alignment issue here. Evaluate that vowel and use your neighbor vowels with it. So, if you can do that and everything's working great, rotate. Or I think I did that one already, but you get what I'm getting at here. We should be able to put them in whatever order we want and get the same results. If we don't, then there is an alignment issue. Frequently it presents itself in the form of the tonal onset, particularly with the ah and o vowels. So you might very easily go a, o, or you might even go o, a, but when you get to ah, you get something like that. Tonal onset on the ah vowel is not working for the alignment issue. That will, if you address it, then that will help quite a lot. When I cross the secondo passaggio, I'm struggling not to slip into my falsetto. So keep in mind, that's falsetto tone production. If you're a tenor or a baritone and you're making your way across the secondo passaggio in the area immediately above C4, you know, so like baritones are here, tenors are there. The voice, to access the cricothyroid dominant singing voice effectively, the head voice, we have to learn to retain the adduction of the vocal fold. And as I mentioned a few moments ago in a previous comment, the best way, if you're having issues with this, is to start from the top down. You. Starting with that kind of an exercise, then you can start to go back and forth across the secondo passaggio with solid vowels. But it can take a little bit of time, it can take some practice. And again, if you're having this issue on the ascending scale where you're ascending and the vocal fold is separating and you're getting that falsetto tone production, the separation of the vocal fold, then start from the top down, establish the cricothyroid dominant singing voice, exit the cricothyroid dominant singing voice, wash, rinse, repeat, learn to make the ascent back into it, and access it with the adducted vocal fold. Right? If you do that and it goes like this, we're not quite there yet. There was a difference in those octaves. One had an adducted vocal fold. The other one had an abducted, what many would call falsetto, what I call falsetto tone production. We want them to be the same. When we get them to be the same, and by the same I mean adducted, now we can start moving on to a narrower interval, eventually onto scales back and forth across the secondo passaggio. Once we've got scales going, we're well on our way to implementing this into our repertoire. If you were to give your best breathing exercise for singing long notes, which one would that be? This one. And I imagine you're asking, but there's no long notes. You're right. There are no long notes in that exercise. But if you'll notice, in that exercise, I have a short note, and then a short breath, and then another short note, short breath. I am constantly doing a small exhalation and singing, and taking a small inhalation. If I'm going to be successful with this, I have to maintain my expansion and I have to maintain my engagement. In so doing, I set up the scenario where the vocal fold is singing a little bit, taking a breath and resetting. When it takes the breath, it separates, the vocal folds separate, and then they have to re-adduct or close again. And with practice, you will achieve the most efficient configuration of subglottic air pressure support and vocal fold engagement. This efficiency means that you get the most efficient use of your air and facilitates singing notes for a rather long amount of time. Here, the scale at the end of the pattern it's kind of a long held passage. It's not a single note, but I am singing for a bit of a scale. And it's very easy for me to do that, and I'm sure it's probably pretty easy for you too. I could easily double that scale. I could even triple it. I bet I could add another one too, but you get my point. By getting the vocal fold to be as configured as possible, configured as efficiently as possible, we're going to get the nice long pitches that we need. Also, I'm learning to take rather short but well-timed breaths that are getting me right to where I need to be for the long passage. So I'm working very much in balance with my capacity and what I know is coming phrase-wise. That too can be very, very helpful in repertoire. When you know you have a long-held passage or long-held note that's coming, learning to take advantage of the short breaks when a consonant in a phrase appears to grab a quick little top-up breath along the way can make all the difference between getting through that long phrase or long-held note with some air to spare at the end or getting caught out on it, which we don't want to do. That's my exercise. I hope that helps. Hey, sir, just want to say your videos have helped me a lot. Thank you. How can I start my career as a singer? Thank you. I appreciate that. I do hope that these videos help and serve well. That's why they're there. So thank you. Thank you for watching. Depends on what you want as a career as a vocalist. I would suggest to you that in some parts, in some way, you have just started it. If you haven't started already, you certainly started it now by asking this question, because what I would say to you is get started right now. That would be my first and foremost advice. Don't start tomorrow, start right now. If it's practicing and setting up a consistent practice schedule, do that. If you've been doing that for a while, what's the next step? What exactly do you mean as a career as a singer? Or what do you say exactly? Yes, a career as a singer. Is that a backing vocalist? Is that a lead singer? Is that a singer-songwriter? Do you play an instrument too? Or producer? Are you doing beats? Are you spitting rhymes? If that phrase is even still used any longer. In what capacity are you trying to be a singer? Look at the path ahead of you. Look at the paths that other people have followed. Are any of the offshoots of that available to you? Can you get on any of them? Can you talk to those people? Can you find someone who'll talk to you and say, well, I did this, or I did that? For my part, I would tell you that now, and I'm kind of assuming that you're maybe wanting to be an independent artist here. I could be wrong. It's never been a better time to make your music and put it out there. So, at the very least, make your music. We want to hear it. There's several billions of people that regularly use the internet, and I couldn't even begin to guess how many people are on YouTube every day. Yes, there are oceans and oceans of videos on YouTube, but there's only one you. And you making your music and your art is the only time that this will happen. So make your music, put it out there, let's hear it. And your crowd, your peeps, I think will find you. And I hope that they do. And the sooner that you get started, the sooner they will. Thank you. That's a great question, and thanks for watching again. I don't know if you can all see my iPad shaking. They're doing some road works, and in California, you're always afraid of the big earthquake, and it's kind of got me on edge today. When you started singing, did you like your voice? And if you didn't, at what time did you accept it? Tips for having confidence in your voice. Confidence for me comes through being able to rely on my voice rather definitively. And so I initially found a lot of comfort and confidence in diving very deeply into technical practices. That's probably why I have the YouTube channel that I do. These warm-up videos are technical practices, and they're the same kinds of things that I've used and I teach my clients, which has been extremely helpful and worked really, really well. And so I'm like to share them as much as I can. But it won't get you all the way, I'm sorry to say. That will get you 60, maybe 60% of the way there. The remaining 40% is going to become a bit of an internal journey, in my opinion, and you will have to ask yourself why it is you are feeling a lack of confidence. If you have not done your homework, then that is a fairly easy explanation. If you just haven't practiced, or if you haven't practiced effectively, then it will be obvious. And in that instance, your hesitancy or your lack of confidence is trying, in my opinion, to tell you to prepare differently or prepare more, to look at how you are preparing. If you haven't done the preparations, that's a different matter. But once you've done that and you can definitively say, I am prepared, I have done all the practices, I have learned the melody on the piano, I have evaluated the range constraints and all the other things that we can do, then ask yourself what it is that is causing you discomfort. I can tell you, for me, it is very much imposter syndrome. It's a little different than imposter syndrome. Used to be imposter syndrome. Now, when I'm getting ready, as if we can take the stage right now anyway, but when I would perform, I would overwhelmingly have the sense that I was not wanted, that I was not wanted to be there, that people did not want to hear me. Now, in truth, I've done a lot of gigs in my time where that was true, where I was doing like Borders Books and Music gigs, and at one point someone turned up to me and said, hey, what's it feel like to play a gig in a library? Not the nicest thing to say. Yet, there's an element of truth to that. In some respects, though Borders wanted me to be there, that particular individual did not. I was disrupting their book reading time. I kind of get it. Other times I had different scenarios and things like that that turned out much differently and were much more interesting in how a seemingly uncomfortable situation can be turned into something rather interesting and enlightening. And I'm thinking particularly of a couple wine bar gigs that I've done over the years where the patrons were there to have a glass of wine and talk in a very sotto voce kind of way, and I'm always very respectful of volume, but they wanted it quieter still. But after a bit of time and a little bit of back and forth, you can feel things change in the room, and then you can watch them change, and before too long, everything is working really nicely. And it's not that it's overpowering, but that it's a working together of the presence, and it makes it for a really delightful experience because people are happy to be there, to be experiencing the music that you're making in whatever capacity you're doing it, but it's a give and a take so that we're all kind of vibing together. But you have to get through that initial period of discomfort, and that is what I would focus on. So whatever it is that is, whatever your personal saboteur is that's making you so uncomfortable, that's creating that feeling of a sense of lack of confidence, find the thing that you can shift your focus to until you start to get into the room. And that's how I think about it. I think about it as being within the space of the room. Not too much so that it overflows it, but not too small so that you're diminutive in it, just to the size of the room. And for me, that is leaning into my expansion and pressing down with my heels into the floor. So I'm very firmly rooted in my spot. I'm not static, but I'm generating a sense of engagement with my position. And that gets me through the first several tunes, and then from there on out, things start to feel a little bit easier and you start to build a little momentum. And from there, oftentimes, in my experience, things have gotten to be really, really fun. So I hope that helps. Confidence issues can be very, very tricky. Not the least of which of the reasons for that is that they can oftentimes abate for a while and then come back with a vengeance. So know that that is possible too, that the work that you do may not be a one-time effort, that you're going to have to keep on revisiting it. I wish it weren't so, but that has been my experience. And I suspect that I'm not the only person. Do you have any thoughts on role models? I was attracted to the big voices with high notes, but as time went by, learned to appreciate what went on between the high notes, legato. purity and consistency of tone and even production, as well as the way a line was sung and a song interpreted. Now, when I look for how something is done, I look for more than big sound and high notes, without losing their thrill. Do you have role models? And how do they inspire or guide you? Lovely question. Lovely question. Lovely to think about. I flit about, and I suppose when I think about my role models, I don't necessarily think about them only as vocalists. There are certainly vocalists to whom I will listen to more for their vocal qualities, but I am more frequently listening to how vocalists and songs work together to create an experience, how it all goes together. So, first of all, let's frame all this. I primarily write, record, practice, and sing popular, if somewhat older, songs. I sing a little bit of classical repertoire from time to time just for fun or whatever, but most of my pursuits are in the popular genres. And to that end, I very frequently will listen to the Beatles, and I will come back to the Beatles time and again, not just for their vocal qualities, but for the whole picture. I do like Paul McCartney's voice quite a lot, but I also am listening to the writing, the lyrical content somewhat, certainly, because I think that's important if you're writing songs, but the compositional qualities. So one might argue that I'm listening quite a lot to George Martin's work, because of course without him, their music would be very, very different indeed. He had a lot to do in what we hear as the Beatles. And from there, we start getting even further afield. So, like, for example, I recently discovered Declan McKenna. Delightful. Love it. Absolutely love it. For the past several days, and I've been thinking about this a lot as I've been thinking about answering this question, I've been listening to the Astronaut, Be an Astronaut song, I think is the title of it. Absolutely love it. Compositionally, fantastic. Lots of different changes, rhythms, different sections. I love the way he uses his voice. I love the way that Jeff Buckley used his voice for his flexibility. When you listen to him sing, he is sometimes using quite a belty tone. Sometimes he's using an abducted falsetto tone production. Sometimes he's using a very definitive head voice that's very full, and voce piena in testa would be the term I would use. He's very, very flexible. So if there were one thing that I look for and I value quite a lot in my role models is flexibility. And it needn't just be a male vocalist either. There are lots of other people. Katie Lang, for example, is fantastic as a vocalist. I love Amy Mann and her ability to have these beautiful melodic lines with a voice that still sounds very conversational. I think it's absolutely astounding how conversational yet melodic she sounds. I can think of no one else who achieves it to such a balanced degree as she does. I went through a Billie Eilish phase not too long ago and was absolutely thrilled with that. Switching back over to male vocalists, Bruno Mars, astounding. And another, he very frequently is being more voce piena in testa. You don't hear, I haven't listened to tons and tons of his works, but there is less overall demonstrations of flexibility than you would hear perhaps in a Jeff Buckley. But what he does do is, I think, really strikingly awesome, and I think he just uses his voice in a very expert way. I love the way that Sam Smith uses his more cricothyroid dominant head voice application. Gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And his phrasing in legato, I think in my opinion in popular music right now is second to almost none. And I like Adele. I like the way that Adele uses her voice. I think that she has an incredible balance of power and sensitivity. She comes off with such a solid and forthright tone, and yet there is still a vulnerability to it that I find incredibly touching and emotional. And I could probably go on for some time. The big picture that I would, if I were going to kind of put an umbrella over all of it, is that I don't necessarily see any one individual or any one composition or any one style to be the inspiration. I have idolized people in the past, and I think that that was useful for a time, but I think that there was a point at which I stopped doing that, and I would look back on it now and say that was to my detriment, and it may have been, it might not have been, I don't know, because I chose the path that I chose, and I'm here now, and I love what I do, so how bad of a choice could it have been? But I think that pigeonholing myself into that kind of focus prevented me from taking advantage of some unique opportunities that I didn't do specifically because I was so focused in that capacity. And those other opportunities could have had dramatic impacts on my artistry. So I feel a bit bad about not doing that, but I got there in the end, and now I take inspiration from a great many different sources. And I haven't even gotten into instrumental music, because instrumental music is something that I listen to as much as I listen to vocal music, and the way that instruments create melodies, the way that they phrase, just everything about it informs how I try to both compose and use my own voice. That was my thoughts on it. I hope that's not too much. Great question. And finally, how are you doing? I hope you're doing fine. Thank you for all your videos. It always helps me. Well, thank you for watching. Thank you for checking in, and thank you for your kind words, and thank you for asking. I'm a little distracted right now because I'm missing half of a top tooth, and so it's a little uncomfortable, and my tongue keeps catching it, and I'm quite nervous about what I have to. By the time you see this video, it will have been fixed, but I'm quite anxious about going and having that done. I would prefer not to have to do that, but equally I would prefer to have a whole tooth back there, so having half of it cracked off is a little bit uncomfortable. My voice is quite tired, as you can hear. This was a really long video. I took, you can see the edit marks. I took some breaks in there, but nothing of any real length because I like to get into a flow, and so my voice is a little bit tired, a little bit craggy, and I need to look out for that. But I'm doing quite well, and thank you for asking. I really don't have any complaints. I am in the, say, last 40% of recording a new track that I'll be releasing pretty soon, which I'm really excited about. It's been a while since I've done any kind of serious production, so I'm thrilled about that. And yeah, things are okay. Right now, the weather in California is really ominous with the fires, so that's a little disconcerting, but we are far away from them, and we're safe, and really my thoughts go out to those who aren't. There was a lot of people in the backpacking community that were in some very serious situations, and there's particularly one individual that I'm thinking of who owns the Vermilion Valley Resort, and he, in his interviews he said he's going to stay behind, and I understand why he wants to stay behind to protect the premises, and they can always jump in Lake Edison, but I really find myself concerned for him and hope that he and his crew are safe. I know that they will make wise decisions if it comes down to it, but just the same, there were some people in some very bad situations, and I just hope that everyone's out. I hope that the damage, which is devastating, just is what it is, and the loss of human life can be avoided as much as we possibly can. So thank you again for watching. Thank you for asking. I appreciate it. Thank you all for checking in on this video. My name's Jeff. Take really good care of your voices. Enjoy singing, and hopefully we'll see you again. Bye.